Chapter 1. The Outcast on Zenthra. The sprawling city of Zenthra was alive with chaos. Its marketplace was a riot of sound, color, and movement, with merchants from 1,000 worlds hawking their wares. Exotic scents wafted through the air as vendors cooked meals and opened stalls, their voices booming over the chatter of countless buyers. Drones zipped overhead, delivering goods to impatient customers, while massive neon signs advertised everything from rare minerals to off-world entertainment. Yet beneath the bustling exterior of this intergalactic hub lay shadows where the forgotten hid. Tazira sat in one of those shadows, leaning against a cold metal crate in an alley at the edge of the market. Her bioluminescent skin, once a symbol of her vibrant Visaran heritage, glowed faintly in the dim light. Her long, slender legs, once her pride as a diplomat and warrior, were now twisted and useless. An accident had left her paralyzed and discarded, deemed a burden by her people. Her cloak, frayed and barely functional against the cold wind, clung to her frail frame. Tazira adjusted it absent-mindedly, her silver eyes scanning the busy streets beyond her hiding spot. She clutched a small music device in her hand, a relic from her past life. Its soft, melancholic tones played quietly, a reminder of a time when she was respected, even revered. But those days were gone. The accident had happened during a diplomatic mission to forge an alliance between the Visarans and a neighboring species. An explosion, later revealed to be a targeted attack, had left her legs crushed beneath the rubble. Visaran medical technology, though advanced, had failed to restore her mobility. Her people, valuing physical perfection above all else, had turned their backs on her. Her once proud family had disowned her, claiming her condition made her unfit to represent them. Her colleagues had stopped visiting. Slowly but surely, Tazira had been abandoned, left on Zenthra with nothing but her wits and the few scraps she could scavenge. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. Hunger was a constant companion now, one she had learned to endure. She watched the crowd move past, the people too preoccupied with their own lives to notice her. It was better that way. Pity was worse than being ignored. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled her attention back to the alley. Tazira tensed, her fingers tightening around the music device. A shadow fell over her, and she looked up to see a human man standing a few feet away. "Hey," he said, his voice calm and deep. "You okay?" Tazira's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" The man crouched down, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his green eyes were sharp but not unkind. He wore a battered leather jacket, its patches and scuffs telling the story of countless adventures or misadventures. "Just passing through," he said. "Saw you sitting here and thought you might need some help." She let out a bitter laugh. "Help? From a human? That's a new one." "Call me persistent," he replied, offering a faint smile. "Name's Marcus. Captain Marcus Harlan of the Starfinder." Tazira shifted, adjusting the cloak around her shoulders. "Good for you, Captain. Now leave." Marcus didn't move. He glanced at her legs, noting their twisted state, then back at her face. "How long have you been out here?" "Long enough," she said curtly. "Why do you care?" He sat back on his heels, studying her. "Because no one should be left like this. I've got a ship, supplies. I could get you somewhere safe." Tazira's bioluminescent markings flared briefly, a sign of her irritation. "And what's in it for you? What do you want in return?" "Nothing," Marcus said. "Just hate seeing people thrown away." Her silver eyes studied him, searching for any hint of deception. His face was open, his posture relaxed. If he was lying, he was a damn good actor. "Even if I wanted to, I can't leave," she said finally. "In case you haven't noticed, I can't exactly walk." "Good thing my ship has plenty of room," Marcus said, extending a hand. "Come on, let's get you out of here." Tazira hesitated. The human's offer was unexpected, and her instinct screamed at her to refuse. But what choice did she have? Staying on Zenthra meant starvation or worse. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "Fine," she said, "but if this is a trick, you'll regret it." Marcus grinned. "Fair enough." Aboard the Starfinder, Marcus carried Tazira aboard his ship, navigating the narrow corridors with practiced ease. The Starfinder was a mid-sized freighter, its exterior worn and patched in places but still functional. Inside, it was cluttered but cozy, with mismatched furniture and a faint hum of life support systems. He set her down gently on a padded bench in the lounge, then grabbed a blanket from a nearby compartment and draped it over her. "Make yourself at home," he said, gesturing around the room. "It's not much, but it beats the streets." Tazira glanced around, taking in the worn hollow posters on the walls, the small table cluttered with tools, and the shelf lined with books and data slates. "You live like this?" "It's better than it looks," Marcus said, pulling up a chair across from her. "What about you? What's your story?" She stiffened. "I don't owe you my life story." "Fair enough," Marcus said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "But you might want to get some rest. We'll need to figure out a plan in the morning." Tazira's silver eyes flicked toward him, and for a moment, her expression softened. "Why are you helping me?" Marcus shrugged. "Because I can." Her bioluminescent markings dimmed, a sign of exhaustion. She leaned back against the bench, her guard lowering slightly. "Don't make me regret this." "Wouldn't dream of it," Marcus said with a smirk. As Tazira drifted off to sleep, Marcus sat back, his mind racing. Taking her aboard was a risk, he knew that. But something about her struck a chord in him, a sense of shared isolation. For better or worse, their paths were now intertwined. Chapter 2. Shadows of Betrayal. The hum of the Starfinder's engines filled the ship as Marcus guided it through Zenthra's cluttered orbit. The planet's bright lights receded into the blackness of space, leaving them surrounded by the cold, star-speckled void. In the lounge, Tazira sat in her hoverchair, her silver eyes fixed on the viewport as the planet disappeared. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension in her bioluminescent patterns. Marcus glanced back at her from the cockpit doorway. "First, away from Zenthra. After that, anywhere that'll keep us off the radar." Tazira frowned, her glowing patterns dimming slightly. "You don't even know why they abandoned me. For all you know, I could be dangerous." Marcus chuckled, dropping into the co-pilot seat near her. "You've had plenty of chances to stab me, and I'm still here. I'll take my chances." She sighed, leaning back in the hoverchair. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Captain Harlan." He smirked. "Probably a little of both." For a moment, the tension between them eased, replaced by an unexpected warmth. But the moment didn't last. The ship's sensors beeped, drawing Marcus's attention to the console. He leaned forward, his green eyes narrowing as a sleek cruiser appeared on the screen. "That's a Visaran patrol ship," Tazira said, her voice tinged with alarm. Marcus's expression hardened. "Looks like your people aren't done with you." The pursuit begins. The Starfinder veered sharply as Marcus accelerated, putting distance between them and the cruiser. The Visaran ship followed, its sleek design cutting effortlessly through the void. On the screen, Marcus watched as the patrol ship's weapons systems lit up. "Shields up," Marcus muttered, flicking a series of switches on the console. The Starfinder hummed as its defensive systems activated. Tazira's glowing patterns flared with alarm. "You can't outrun them forever. Visaran ships are faster and better armed." "Yeah, but they're not me," Marcus said with a grin. "Hold on." The Starfinder darted into a nearby asteroid field, weaving through the massive, floating rocks. The Visaran cruiser hesitated, its pilot clearly reluctant to follow too closely. Marcus used the hesitation to his advantage, guiding the ship deeper into the field. "They won't give up," Tazira warned, gripping the armrests of her chair. "The Visaran Council considers my survival an insult to their perfection." Marcus glanced at her, his smirk fading. "Why? What's so threatening about you being alive?" Her gaze dropped, her glowing patterns dimming. "I wasn't supposed to survive the accident. They thought leaving me to die on Zenthra would solve their problem. My existence, my disability, is a stain on their image of invincibility." Marcus tightened his grip on the controls. "Well, too bad for them. You're not going anywhere." An unexpected ally. The asteroid field gave them temporary cover, but Marcus knew it wouldn't last. The Visaran cruiser was circling the perimeter, waiting for them to make a mistake. As he plotted their next move, the ship's comm system crackled to life. "Starfinder, this is the Visaran cruiser vindication. Surrender the fugitive, and you will be spared." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Yeah, that sounds convincing." Tazira's expression darkened. They'll destroy us even if you comply. That's how they operate, no witnesses. Marcus switched on the external comm. This is Captain Marcus Harlan of the Starfinder. You can tell your council that Tazira isn't their problem anymore. She's with me now. There was a pause before the reply came, cold and calculating. Then you've signed your own death warrant, Captain. The comm cut off, and Marcus swore under his breath. The cruiser fired, a bright beam of energy slicing through the asteroid field. The Starfinder rocked as the blast grazed its shields, alarms blaring in the cockpit. Shields down to 60%, Tazira reported, her voice steady despite the chaos. Marcus gritted his teeth, guiding the ship through a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. The cruiser followed, its weapons lighting up the void. Time for Plan B. And what's Plan B? Tazira asked. Marcus grinned. We improvise. Turning the tables. As the cruiser closed in, Marcus activated the Starfinder's decoy drones. A dozen small devices shot out from the ship, each one emitting a near-perfect imitation of its energy signature. The drones scattered, confusing the cruiser's targeting systems. They'll figure out the trick soon enough, Tazira warned. That's why we won't be here when they do, Marcus said, steering the Starfinder toward a cluster of highly magnetic asteroids. These rocks mess with their sensors. We use them to disappear. The ship darted into the magnetic cluster, its hull groaning under the strain. The cruiser hesitated again, its scanners flickering as the interference took effect. Marcus deployed more decoys, leading the Visaran ship deeper into the cluster. On the monitor, the cruiser's movements became erratic. Its weapons fired blindly, striking asteroids and sending debris flying. Marcus took advantage of the chaos, guiding the Starfinder out of the cluster and into open space. We're clear, he said, exhaling deeply. Tazira's bioluminescent patterns brightened slightly, a sign of relief. For now, Marcus nodded, his expression serious. We need to figure out our next move. They'll keep coming. She met his gaze, her silver eyes filled with determination. Then we fight. Chapter 3. The Unseen Price. The Starfinder drifted silently through a sector of uncharted space, its systems barely holding together after their narrow escape. Marcus worked furiously at the control panel, patching up damaged circuits and rerouting power to the shields. Sparks flew as he tightened a loose connection, his hands steady despite the chaos. Tazira sat nearby, her hoverchair parked in the corner of the cockpit. Her silver eyes followed Marcus's movements, her bioluminescent patterns flickering faintly. She looked pale, her usual calm shaken after the encounter with the Visaran cruiser. They'll track us again, she said quietly, her voice cutting through the hum of the ship's engines. It's only a matter of time. Marcus didn't look up. Not if I can help it. And how do you plan to stop them? She asked, a hint of bitterness in her tone. They have faster ships, better weapons, and infinite resources. You're just one man in a freighter held together by tape and good intentions. Marcus paused, his green eyes locking onto hers. That one freighter just got us out of their trap, didn't it? Tazira sighed, leaning back in her chair. Barely. And they'll come back stronger. He smirked, wiping his hands on his jacket. Then we'll just have to be smarter. The plan. Once the repairs were complete, Marcus joined Tazira in the lounge, where a dim holographic map of the sector hovered above the table. The map displayed nearby star systems, asteroid fields, and a few uncharted regions. We need to disappear, Marcus said, pointing to a dense nebula at the edge of the map. This area is called the Void's Veil. Thick gas clouds, heavy electromagnetic interference, it's a nightmare for scanners. Perfect for hiding. Tazira studied the map, her glowing patterns brightening slightly. You're risking a lot to protect me. Why? Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms. Because no one deserves to be left behind. You're not just some fugitive, Tazira. You're a person. And I don't leave people to fend for themselves. Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the weight of her past seemed to lift. Then let's make sure your faith in me isn't misplaced. Into the veil. Navigating the Void's Veil was a harrowing experience. The nebula was a swirling mass of gas and debris, its electromagnetic interference wreaking havoc on the Starfinder's systems. The ship's sensors flickered, and the engines groaned under the strain. Stay close to the edge of the field, Tazira suggested, her voice calm despite the turbulence. "The interference will protect us without disabling the ship entirely." Marcus nodded, adjusting their course. "If we're lucky, the Visarans won't risk following us in here." "They will," Tazira said grimly, "but they'll be at the same disadvantage." As they delved deeper into the nebula, the Starfinder's comm system crackled to life. A distorted voice filled the cockpit, its words barely audible through the static. "Captain Harlan," the voice said, "this is Commander Illith of the Visaran fleet. Surrender the fugitive, and we will spare your ship." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Do they teach you all to lie like that? Or is it just a personal talent?" The comm fell silent for a moment before the voice returned, colder this time. "You're sealing your own fate, human." Marcus switched off the comm and turned to Tazira. "They're close." "They'll use the interference against us," Tazira warned. "They have scout smaller ships that can maneuver through the nebula. Then we'll take them out before they can report back," Marcus said, flipping switches on the console. "Buckle up." The chase. Moments later, the first scout ship appeared on their scanners, a small, agile craft darting through the nebula with ease. Marcus gripped the controls, steering the Starfinder into a sharp turn to avoid detection. "They're scanning the area," Tazira said, watching the monitors. "If they find us, they'll relay our location to the cruiser." "Not if I get them first," Marcus replied, firing up the ship's weapons. The Starfinder's cannons roared to life, sending a barrage of energy bolts toward the scout ship. The craft dodged, its movements quick and precise, but one of the bolts clipped its wing. The scout spun out of control, crashing into a nearby gas cloud. "Nice shot," Tazira said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "Thanks," Marcus said, his focus already on the next target. "But we're not out of the woods yet." Two more scout ships appeared on the scanners, their formations tight as they closed in on the Starfinder. Marcus accelerated, weaving through the dense clouds as the enemy ships gave chase. Tazira's glowing patterns brightened. "There's a debris field up ahead. If we can lure them into it, their speed will work against them." "Good thinking," Marcus said, steering toward the field. The debris field was a graveyard of old ships and shattered asteroids, its jagged edges a deadly obstacle course. Marcus guided the Starfinder through the narrow gaps, the enemy ships following close behind. The first scout ship clipped an asteroid, its hull crumpling as it exploded. The second tried to evade, but a shard of debris punctured its engine, sending it spiraling into the void. Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "That's two down." "And the cruiser?" Tazira asked. Before Marcus could respond, the Starfinder's sensors lit up. The Visaran cruiser had entered the nebula, its massive form cutting through the gas clouds like a predator stalking its prey. The stand. The Starfinder emerged from the debris field into a relatively clear pocket of the nebula. Marcus slowed the ship, his mind racing as he considered their options. The cruiser was closing in, and their escape routes were dwindling. "We can't outrun them," Tazira said, "but we might be able to outsmart them." Marcus turned to her. "What do you have in mind?" She hesitated, her bioluminescent patterns dimming. "The Visaran ships rely heavily on their AI systems. If we can overload their network with false data, it could disable their weapons and sensors long enough for us to escape." "That's a big if," Marcus said, "but it's worth a shot." Tazira rolled to the console, her fingers flying across the controls as she accessed the ship systems. "I'll need a direct line to their network. Get me close enough, and I can send the overload." Marcus nodded, his hands steady on the controls. "Hang on." The Starfinder turned to face the approaching cruiser, its cannons charging as the enemy ship loomed closer. Marcus fired a series of shots, drawing the cruiser's attention as Tazira worked. "They're locking onto us," she warned, her voice calm but urgent. "Not for long," Marcus said, accelerating toward the cruiser. Tazira's fingers moved faster, her glowing patterns flaring as she transmitted the overload. The cruiser's lights flickered, its weapons falling silent as its systems scrambled to process the influx of false data. "Now's our chance," she said. Marcus veered away from the cruiser, pushing the Starfinder to its limits as they escaped the nebula. Behind them, the Visaran ship remained adrift, its systems paralyzed. A fragile victory. Hours later, the Starfinder drifted in the calm of open space, its systems stable but its crew exhausted. Marcus sat in the cockpit, his head resting against the back of his chair. Tazira joined him, her hoverchair gliding silently into place. "That was reckless," she said, though her tone lacked the sharpness it usually carried. "You're welcome," Marcus replied with a faint smile. Tazira's bioluminescent patterns pulsed softly, a sign of her gratitude. "Thank you, Marcus, for not giving up on me." He turned to her, his green eyes warm. "What are captains for?" As they stared out at the stars, the weight of their ordeal began to lift. For the first time in a long time, Tazira felt a glimmer of hope. Chapter 4. A New Legacy. The Starfinder floated in open space, its engines humming softly as Marcus and Tazira caught their breath. The Visaran cruiser was long behind them, disabled and unable to pursue. The aftermath of their escape left the ship in a fragile state, its shields flickering intermittently and its hull scorched from near misses. Tazira remained in her hoverchair near the viewport, her glowing patterns dim but steady. She had saved them with her quick thinking, but the toll of their constant running was evident in her weary expression. Marcus emerged from the engineering bay, wiping grease from his hands. His jacket was singed, and exhaustion lined his face, but his eyes were still sharp. "Engines are stable for now. Shields are another story, but I'll patch them up soon enough." Tazira nodded, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse of stars. "We've bought ourselves time, but it's only a matter of time before they find us again." Marcus sat down across from her, leaning forward with his arms on his knees. "Not if we stop running." She turned to him, her silver eyes narrowing. "What are you suggesting?" "We hit them first," Marcus said simply. "You said the Visaran Council wants you gone because you're a threat to their perfect image. What if we make that threat impossible to ignore?" "The plan." Tazira hesitated, her glowing patterns flickering with uncertainty. "You're talking about going back into Visaran space. That's suicide." Marcus shook his head. "Not if we're smart about it. Your people rely on secrecy and control. If we expose what they've done, what they're willing to do to preserve their so-called perfection, could turn the tide." "And how do you plan to do that?" Tazira asked, her voice skeptical but laced with a glimmer of hope. "Your story," Marcus said. "If we can broadcast the truth, how they abandoned you, how they've hunted you, they'll have to answer for it. Not everyone in the galaxy buys into their propaganda. We just need to find the right people to listen." Tazira frowned, her gaze dropping to her hands. "You don't understand. My people don't just fear imperfection, they destroy it. Even if we expose them, they'll come after us harder than before." "Maybe," Marcus admitted, "but if we do nothing, they win. I'm not the kind of guy who lets bullies get away with this crap. And I don't think you are either." Her bioluminescent patterns brightened slightly, her determination returning. "If we do this, we'll need allies. Someone with influence." Marcus leaned back, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Good thing I know a guy." A dangerous alliance. The Starfinder made its way to an unregistered station in the Outer Rim, a haven for smugglers, hackers, and all manner of outlaws. The station's exterior was a patchwork of metal and debris, held together more by reputation than structural integrity. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the hum of illicit activity. Marcus led Tazira through the crowded halls, her hoverchair drawing curious stares but no questions. They stopped outside a private chamber guarded by two hulking aliens with cybernetic implants. "I'm here to see Drix," Marcus said, his tone confident but measured. The guards exchanged glances before one of them pressed a button on the wall. The door slid open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with monitors and consoles. At the center of the chaos sat Drix, a wiry human with augmented eyes that glowed faintly blue. "Marcus Harlan," Drix said, leaning back in his chair. "Didn't think I'd see you again. What's the job this time?" Marcus gestured to Tazira. "We need a broadcast. Something big. Something the Visarans can't ignore." Drix's augmented eyes flicked to Tazira, scanning her from head to toe. "Interesting. What's the story?" Tazira straightened, her voice firm despite her nerves. "I'm Tazira, former diplomat of the Visaran Council. They abandoned me, left me to die because I no longer fit their standards. And now they're hunting me to erase their mistake." Drix whistled low, a grin spreading across his face. "That's juicy. But broadcasting something like this? The Visarans won't just come for you, they'll come for me. Marcus leaned forward. You've built your reputation on exposing corruption, Drix. This could be your biggest score yet. Drix considered for a moment, then nodded. All right, but this better be worth it. Let's get to work. The broadcast. The next few hours were a blur of activity as Drix's team worked to craft the broadcast. Tazira recorded her story, her voice steady as she recounted her experiences, the accident, the abandonment, and the relentless pursuit. Marcus added footage of their escape from the Visaran cruiser, the explosions and chaos painting a vivid picture of their struggle. When the broadcast was ready, Drix's team sent it out on every available channel, using encrypted networks to ensure it spread. Within hours, it was being viewed across the galaxy, drawing attention from journalists, activists, and even rival governments. The response was immediate. Outrage erupted across the galactic networks as people learned of the Visaran Council's actions. Protests broke out in allied systems, demanding accountability. Even within Visaran space, whispers of dissent began to grow. The final confrontation. The Visaran Council didn't take the broadcast lightly. Within days, a fleet of their ships appeared on the edge of the outer rim, their intent clear. Marcus and Tazira prepared for the inevitable confrontation, rallying support from those who had been moved by their story. When the Visaran fleet arrived, they were met by an unexpected coalition ships from systems that had suffered under Visaran rule, along with rogue factions willing to fight for justice. The ensuing battle was fierce, but the Visaran forces were outmaneuvered by the combined efforts of their opponents. Amid the chaos, Marcus and Tazira led a strike team to disable the Visaran flagship. They infiltrated the ship, broadcasting one final message directly to the council chambers. Tazira faced her former colleagues, her voice strong as she condemned their actions. "You abandoned me because you feared what I represented," she said. "But I'm still here, and I'm not alone." A new beginning. The battle ended with the Visarans retreating, their power shaken by the public outcry and their military defeat. Tazira, once an outcast, became a symbol of resilience and defiance, her story inspiring countless others to stand against oppression. As the Starfinder drifted through calm space once more, Marcus turned to Tazira with a grin. "So, what's next for the galaxy's newest hero?" She smiled, her bioluminescent patterns glowing brightly. "Whatever comes, I know I won't face it alone." Together, they stared out at the stars, ready to face whatever lay ahead.